good day, and good day for everybody from wherever you are. I hope that you have had no problem joining us. My name is Nadereh Chamlou. I am a board member of the International Iranian Economic Association, and very delighted to welcome you to the 20th webinar of the International Iranian Economic Association. The papers that we will be presenting today were selected by our scientific committee for presentation at our planned in-person conference in Doha later this year in November. But given the current regional circumstances, we have had to resort once again to the virtual mode. So I hope that you are able to join us from wherever you are, because it's a very interesting and timely topic. As many of you know, the debate on economics and happiness or satisfaction has gained quite a lot of prominence in recent years, with such influential voices like Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, who has challenged the traditional economic metrics such as GDP, growth, etc., and has argued that GDP is an inadequate measure of well-being, and that the primary focus on economic output without accounting for income inequality, environmental degradation, and other social factors that influence people's quality of life is inadequate. Stiglitz, along with Amartya Sen and Jean-Paul Fitoussi, highlighted these concerns in their 2009 report. I believe it was 2009 report that was commissioned by the French government, and called for a more comprehensive set of indicators of societal well-being. In the report, they advocated for the inclusion of other measures such as education, health, environmental sustainability, and other subjective measurements of well-being or happiness in order to provide a fuller picture of national progress, not just growth. This approach was also closely aligned with the concept of what has since become a major trend, and that is called beyond GDP, and a growing movement that argues that the incorporation of well-being metrics into economic assessments are very critical. As many of you also know, the debate, this whole debate has begun long time ago, and has also been mainstreamed into the entire happiness reports that have been produced time and again, and has drawn attention to what is called the Easterlin paradox, that was proposed by Richard Easterlin in 1973 or 74. He found that while wealthier individuals within a country tend to report higher levels of happiness, this relationship does not hold over time when comparing rich and poor countries. And this paradox has raised questions about the long-term links between economic growth and happiness. And the critics of the traditional economic approach emphasize that economic growth alone doesn't guarantee increased happiness, especially when wealth is unevenly distributed or when other environmental or societal factors impact or deteriorate over time. And proponents of these alternative measures argue for policies that focus on well-being, sustainability, and equity, rather than just purely on economic growth. With this short intro, I'm delighted that we have these two very innovative, and also very recent and freshly off the press papers that are based on data provided new sets of data that provided part of it through the World Value Survey and part of it through other means that begin to address the issue of, or at least the linkages of satisfaction and well-being within the Iranian society. The first paper, we're going to do it in a different order than announced initially, is by Mohammad Reza Farzanegan and Sven Fischer. The topic is the effect of the woman life freedom protest on the life satisfaction in Iran, and evidence from some survey data. And the presenter is Dr. Sven Fischer, who holds a doctorate in, or a PhD in economics from the Philipps-Universität in Marburg, West Germany, Germany. And he also is currently a postdoc researcher at the same university. And with that, I would like to ask Dr. Fischer to begin his presentation. And I will introduce the second paper after this presentation. You have about 25 minutes, and please go ahead and please also share your slides. Thank you so much and I'm also very delighted that we have two non-Iranian speakers who are interested in Iranian topics, and you're very welcome. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chamlou, for the kind introduction. Also, thank you very much for the association for inviting me for today's talk. Let me also share my screen. So now you should have the full screen. Yeah, as was introduced by Dr. Chamlou, today I'm presenting the co-authored paper with Professor Farzanegan, which is called The Effect of the Women Life Freedom Protest on Life Satisfaction in Iran, Evidence from Survey Data. My name is Sven Fischer. I'm from Center for Near and Middle Eastern Studies from University of Marburg. The structure for today's presentation is presented in the following slide. You can see after the short introduction and motivation of the study, I will give a very brief literature review and then go directly to the methodology and then also results, discussion, and conclusion. So what are we talking about today? So almost 2 years ago, the anniversary was about 2 weeks ago, on 16th September 2022, Gina Mahsa Amini died in the custody of the morality police in Tehran. I assume many of you already remember the pictures. We have also shown here in the slide the picture of the process of arresting her. And then shortly after this event, protest ignited in Tehran and also especially your hometown Sarkis in Kurdistan province, which spread quickly over the whole country of Iran. On the bottom, you can also see a picture on the 40th day after the death, the morning, which also showed the huge interest of Iranian population, especially also women who joined this memorial and also the protest. In addition to the interest from the Iranian population, also the protest gained large international media coverage, which distinguishes from earlier nationwide protests. Those who are familiar with Iran, they know there was also economic protest in 2017 or 2019 fuel price protests, but those other protests did not get that much of international media attention. If we look at the map of Iran, and here we see data from ACLED database, we can see the locations of the demonstrations during the protest in late 2022. And we can see that basically all provinces have experienced the protests. And also according to the reports of human rights organizations, during the first 82 days, almost 500 people were killed, both protesters and security forces, and almost 20,000 individuals were detained. This was only in the first 82 days. Of course, later there were some cases unfortunately added. And this is also one part of our motivation. In the introduction, we wanted to see, okay, why was there this kind of big media coverage, and one aspect might be also the violence involved in the protests, and of course the response of the government forces to the protests. And we can see here the comparison also over the years that the violence was also never seen in at least the years before, where you can see the comparison here from 2016 to 2022. So what is the aim now of the study? So we don't want to find out what are the socioeconomic and institutional drivers of these protests, but we want to see what are the effects of these protests on life satisfaction of the people in Iran. And in addition, we want to see and identify which subgroups of the population were affected most and what mediators exist between the protest and life satisfaction. That means, how does these protests experience or this violent environment during the protests affect the life satisfaction of the people? Literature review is super short here. So there's already like a side of literature which looks into more extreme forms of violence, such as terrorism, conflict, and war. And we can find that these negatively affect subjective well-being, measured through different types of indicators, for example, mental health, happiness, or life satisfaction. Some of the cited studies you can see here. You can find the full references in our working paper. The impact of protests on subjective well-being was studied a bit less. There are some studies from Hong Kong protests during the Occupy movement time, and also time from Arab Spring. So, but overall, the studies on the impact of protests on subjective well-being are a bit lesser than on the other topics. Yeah. And we want then to evaluate the impact of the violent protest environment in the context of the Women Life Freedom protests in Iran on life satisfaction. And we do it by using two surveys that were self-developed and collected by computer-assisted telephone interviews in Persian language. We did not do these interviews by ourselves, but we organized or we hired an organization that did the surveys in Iran, and it is the same organization that also did the wave 7 of the World Value Surveys, which gives it already some credibility. The surveys were fortunately funded by German Academic Exchange Service, and without the help, we will not be able to do the surveys. Yeah. So we have now these two representative surveys, which were also done with a multi-stage cluster sampling approach, which should guarantee some representativeness. That means in different stages, it was make sure that the sample represents the Iranian population as best as possible. The respondents were approximately 1,200 in both surveys. The first survey was in early 2022, and the second survey was in late 2022. And the start of the protest was in mid-September 2022. So this means we had one survey that was before the protest and another survey that was during the protest. Or if you now see in this slide, more precisely, the second survey was almost during the peak of protests. Here I have shown the number of violent events per month in Iran in the years 2021 and 2022. And we can see that the second survey, represented by the red line here, is almost at the peak of the amount of violent events. So this should show that, yeah, we have here some different groups, where one group has experienced the violence either directly or indirectly. The other group was in a more stable time. So this is also our assumption then, that the participants of the second survey are our treatment group, and the participants of the first survey are the control group. And we compare basically these two groups with our methodological approach to see how the life satisfaction have changed from the one survey to another survey. And to operationalize the different treatment effects, the treatment effect, we created different measures, which you can see in the following. So first we used a very simple dummy variable where we just said 1 if the respondent is part of the second survey, 0 if it's from the first survey. So very simple approach here. Then in the second dummy variable, we also consider the location. So we said here that it is 1 if the respondent is part from the second survey and is living in a city of protest. So we get from ACLED database the geocoded events, so we can see in which cities are the protests, and also we have the information of the respondents in which city they are. We don't have the direct locations, but we can at least say they're in the same city as the protests. Then also we try different other measures like the number of protests in the respondent city. And when we differentiate or when we use the number of protests, we can also differentiate between violent and peaceful protests. And we also did this. And also in the appendix, you can see different distances, not just the respondent city. We also look for 25 kilometers away, 50 kilometers, 75 kilometers to see if also distance from the protest matters in the measured effect. So this would be our main explanatory variable. The dependent variable is life satisfaction. And we asked the question in the survey, all things considered, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole these days? And the 4 possible answer possibilities are mentioned here. It goes from completely dissatisfied to completely satisfied. And for pragmatic reasons, we rescaled it in the estimations as a binary variable, where we have it 1 if it is the 2 supporting the life satisfaction, and 0 if it's the 2 not supporting ones. If we look already here at the question and the answers, we can already see some trend that we say that between the first survey and the second survey, the people who are completely satisfied with their life has decreased by about 4 percentage points, and those who are completely dissatisfied, on the other hand, it has increased from survey 1 to survey 2. So this is already the first glimpse how this life satisfaction has shifted from the first survey to the second survey. We have then defined several hypotheses based on our literature review and our theoretical background, which I'm not presenting here. I'm just going to the hypothesis. So the protest environment has decreased life satisfaction in Iran would be our first hypothesis. Then the negative effect of the protest environment on life satisfaction is stronger among female respondents. So this was our other hypothesis, as these women life freedom protests are also really mainly a female movement, I would say, especially in the beginning. And therefore, we would maybe also expect some different effects among male and female here. Another hypothesis would be related to the consumption of media. So we had also in our survey question about what type of media the people consume and how often. We differentiate here between international media, international TV, national TV, internet, radio, and newspaper. So we checked if this is also making a difference, what kind of media you consume. And then we finally also wanted to see, of course, what is the role of violence here. And we wanted to show also see how the violence plays a role and if the effect is driven by the violent protests. And very simply here illustrated, we want to see how the protests affect life satisfaction or the protest environment and the related violence. Maybe we can also say not just the protest. And to examine this, we use probate regressions, where we report also in the results the marginal effects. And we include, of course, the different control variables which are the standard in this kind of analysis, which you see on the bottom, things like gender, age, marital status, religiosity, and so on and so forth. Then we had 2 more hypotheses related to the channel, how the protests affect life satisfaction, and we wanted to analyze with the mediation analysis if the feeling of security will mediate this effect, or also if the support of surveillance is also a mediator of this effect. And this is also from psychological literature. Again, it's more used in psychology, this mediation analysis, where we calculate different probit regressions basically, and then can calculate certain ratios to determine how much of the share of the final effect comes from the mediator, and how the protest in certain share affect the life satisfaction. Now coming to the results. So in this first table that I present you, you can see the results of the probit estimations. Here we have the marginal effects reported, and in column 2.1, it is just a simple dummy variable, which is coded 1 if the person is in the second survey, 0 if it's in the first survey. And you can see for the full sample that we have a reduction of life satisfaction by about 3.6 percentage points. When we look at the other dummy variable on the column 2.4, we can see that it is a bit larger, the coefficient, but the marginal effect with about 3.8 percentage point. And this is coded in a way that it is 1 if the person is in the second survey and if the protests were in the same city as the person. So we can see, yeah, distance matters somewhat in this presentation, as the effect is slightly larger. For the female subsample, we see a stronger effect compared to the full sample. We see here the life satisfaction has reduced by 5.6 percentage points in column 2.2. Or if we also consider the city of protest, it is about 7.8 percentage point decrease in column 2.5. Yeah, this would refer to our hypothesis number 2. Also here, maybe for later discussion, the control variables. Yeah, so this is what I already said. Then we come to the hypothesis 3 about the media. And here we see different subsamples for the media consumption. It shows basically that those respondents who heavily consume international TV, they report higher reduction in the life satisfaction than the persons who watch other international TV or other types of media. So what is the idea here? Why are we interested in this effect? As the most of you might know who are from the Iranian context, there's a lot of channels like Iran International and other channels that are more opposing to the Iranian government. And those channels regularly or mainly bring very negative news about the Iranian government, about the situation in Iran. And we argue that this kind of negative news that people see all the time, it will also negatively affect the psychology and therefore also reduce the life satisfaction in a stronger way. Yeah. So in the end, as I said, the largest marginal effect is shown by consumers of international TV. Then we come to the hypothesis about the violent and peaceful protests. Here we use the other measurement of the protest, so the number of peaceful protests and number of violent protests. And we can see that the number of violent protests basically reduces life satisfaction. But on the other hand, number of peaceful protests can also increase life satisfaction. So this is for us also evidence to say, yeah, that this negative effect that we find is based on the violence, not maybe on the protest itself. So the protest in the end can also be something positive. We also discuss this in more detail in our paper. Some things why peaceful protests might increase life satisfaction. Some arguments might be that protests can be kind of a catharsis that make you feel better afterwards. Also, it can make that you feel more empowered, and these kind of factors can also increase your life satisfaction. In also this slide, you can see we tested also an instrumental variable approach. When we had the number of protests, we could also use an instruments here. So we tried also to consider this reverse feedback and other problems that we might have with our approach. And we use the precipitation data and the distance to the city of Sarkes as instruments. We use the standard test for the good instruments, and we show that these are relevant instruments. And here you can see also then the how the number of protests in total affect the life satisfaction. Yeah, when considering this. Finally, I will also, I guess, skip this slide. I go directly to the results. So the results of the mediation analysis using probit estimations shows us that about 30.7% of the total effect of protest on life satisfaction can be explained by our two mediators. We can also see here that the female subsample has a stronger, or the share is larger, especially about the mediator of supportive surveillance. And overall, we can see that these two mediators can explain the effect between protest and life satisfaction. So how do these mediators explain it? So the idea is for maybe for the feeling of security, that on the protest decrease the feeling of security, and due to this channel, the life satisfaction will be reduced, and the support of surveillance is also be reduced by the protest due to the reaction, for example, of the government forces, and then this will also reduce the life satisfaction. So these are the two channels that we found. Then we come to the conclusion. So overall, the results suggest that the protest environment and the associated violence had a negative effect on the population's life satisfaction. We could see that the largest negative impact of protest on life satisfaction is observed among women and consumers of international TV. We found also that feeling of security and support of surveillance are important mechanisms that explain how the protest can decrease life satisfaction. And overall, we provide new empirical evidence how the protests, or in general, protests, violence, or instability can affect subjective well-being of Iranians. Thank you very much for your attention. Here you can see my email. Also, if you want to see our working paper, you can find it here, also including the references. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very concise and a very interesting presentation. Before I move to the next paper, maybe I have a few questions myself, as well as maybe we can have the questions related to your paper before we, so that we can address them right away. I noticed that the company that does the surveys, they rely on landlines. Is that the case? At least that's what I read in the paper. Could that have an impact on survey respondents? Because the younger generation of people certainly have more, use more just mobiles. And would that kind of impact the results? So that's my question number one. My question number two is that from your analysis, is it also possible to do the analysis by age? In other words, younger people in general, not just female and men and males, younger people versus older people. Because I think that perhaps the life satisfaction impact, or at least the responses of younger generation, regardless of whether they're men or women, might be quite different than the responses of older generation. Is this something that you could perhaps talk about, given the analysis that you have done?
Yes, thank you very much for these very good and relevant questions. The first one about the landlines, maybe I can also show the distribution. Let me see. So they are here. So overall, you're right. You can only reach a certain target audience, right, if you call by phone. However, the survey is constructed in a way that it targets certain age groups. And we can see that the target is here represented in red. That would be the data from the Iranian census, 2016. And yeah, we can see that it is very comparable. However, a bit short on the lower end. As you can also see, we were targeted 15%, maybe it was 12.8% of young people. So maybe you're right, the young people might be a bit underrepresented here. Nevertheless, they are in a high share represented in the survey. So I would not say that this is a especially negative part. Also, we can see that the very old people, or not very old, 60 is not old, but older people between 60 and 65, they are also underrepresented in our survey. Also, we don't have people under the age of 18 in the survey or over 65. So this should also be mentioned. So we can see basically that the main core of the respondents is maybe between 25 and 60. So this is about your question. Then we come to the second question about the age. Yes, we can also do this according to age. And I think in one of our earlier versions also we did it. And if I remember correctly, we found a stronger impact for the younger people. Maybe we can consider also maybe to include this again in the paper. Yeah.
I have a few questions. Excuse me for my cough that have come in already. Excuse me. How should one interpret, this is from Saleh Tabrizi, how should one interpret, say, an 8% decline in life satisfaction? What would be a useful benchmark in this context? For instance, what is the marginal effect on life satisfaction when one loses her job? Or what is the marginal effect when one loses a loved one? With no proper benchmark, the magnitude of the marginal effect remains vague.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Actually, we also address this in our paper, I think even in the introduction, but I can also go through it again here. So it's very relevant. So what does it mean? Let's maybe go to the first table here. So we say that basically the probability of being satisfied with life is reduced by 3.6 percentage point. And if we look now, then here maybe at the unemployment, we can see unemployment would be 6.3 percentage point. So being unemployed would be having a stronger effect for the overall sample. Here when we have it, yeah, so maybe this can be a comparison. These are both the marginal effects. So we can see that basically the reduction in life satisfaction for becoming unemployed is higher, for example, than those of experiencing the protests. Yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Well, let me just also, I think the same person has asked the second question. Also, has there been any studies showing that protests and violence tend to have positive effects on life satisfaction? If not, I wonder what is interesting about the findings that you report other than qualifying an expected adverse effect. Quantifying, sorry, other than quantifying an expected adverse effect.
Yeah, thank you very much also for this question. So in the end, we show with our results that we can see that the violent protest has a negative effect, peaceful protest has a positive effect. There's also other studies, the very few studies I cited, the one from Hong Kong, they also discuss this. So they discuss that there is a positive effect of protest on psychological indicators. They don't use life satisfaction. They use other psychological measures, if I remember correctly. And they also discuss how it can be having negative effects. So in the literature, you can find both of the results. Of course, the more closer we would say maybe if there's violence, it will reduce it. But we show here also that, violence, I guess, overall decreases this, no question. But for protest, I guess the question is not so easy to answer if it automatically increases or decreases the life satisfaction. as also the literature shows. Yeah.
The second question, we have a question from Samira Barzin, who says, how do you address rural-urban patterns, also given the differing ACLED quality? Sorry for this, this ringing phone. So how do you address the rural-urban patterns, also given differing ACLED quality across two types of regions? Additionally, how do you control for the social desirability bias in the survey data?
Okay. For the rural and urban, so in the end, we are dependent here on the ACLED data, so we cannot really control for the quality. Probably there are more reported cases in the cities. We just need to hope that, I mean, we have also reports from the villages and so on about protests in the ACLED data. But yeah, this is a relevant comment that it might be more reporting in the cities or in the urban areas. If you also want to see the difference effect between urban and rural areas, we have also in our paper in the appendix also some estimations. Unfortunately, I didn't put it here in the appendix of the slides, but if you're interested, you can also find this in the paper.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question by Hassan Hakimian. He says, I noticed the question asked in Persian started with all things considered. What does this really mean? And in Persian, how is it translated? Dar majmu? I find it rather vague and ambiguous qualifier. The second question is the seasonality. Life satisfaction also varies with weather conditions. I think you have addressed that. Life satisfaction also varies with weather conditions, as for instance, in winter, suicide rates are higher. Did you take that into account?
About the question, thank you very much also for these questions. About the question in the Farsi, honestly, I don't remember exactly the phrasing in Farsi. I need to look it up. We have the survey responses and questions also. I can look this up and maybe later share the information with you. But we are assuming that it was done by the professionals, and also these are I would say, the regular questions. These are not unique, maybe questions about life satisfaction and happiness, that this could be understood. But yeah, I will need to check what was the exact phrasing, and maybe in future surveys how this can be improved. About the seasonality, yeah, I mean, we have only basically here two snapshots in time, one survey and the second survey. Of course, there can be changes afterwards, after the survey, that maybe it changes again. About seasonality, I would say that both in winter, more or less, or because the one was in January, February, the other was in November. So I guess the temperatures, I'm not sure about all regions in Iran, but they should be maybe similar. But of course, the one concern would be that we have like a snapshot during the protest, maybe at the peak, but maybe 1 month before the results might be different 1 month after. So this would be maybe a concern also to do follow-up studies. But about the seasons, for example, winter, I think it's basically winter, at least what I would consider it. So I don't see here a big concern. Thank you.
The second, a question from Ariane Manofi Niazi. What are the R squares of the regressions?
The R squares, I think with the probit, it is not that, I mean, there's not that easy to calculate the R squared. It will be a different other indicator, but we have not reported it here now. Like, but we can maybe include other goodness of fit indicators to show how well the models are doing what they should do. So I will also put this comment. Thank you.
Okay. Another question, an interesting question from Aida Mirzai. She says, why do you characterize the protests as violent? The protests were peaceful, but the reaction from authorities were violent. Would you like to explain more on this characterization?
Yeah, I mean, this question we had before also. So maybe we try to call it in the paper also the violent protest environment, not the protest itself. Maybe it's a bit misleading, I have to admit, that we say it's the protest. So it's the overall environment concerning to the protests, which is the reaction of government forces and overall the deaths and the violence that happened during the protests. But yeah, it's a good comment, and I hope this answers the question.
And what did you determine as violent? For instance, when people were killed, or when people were, I mean, this is just a question, or when, for instance, there was just, let's say, I don't know, let's say tear gas, or what was, because there was a big, wide, gap between violence and violence. And
yeah, I mean,
how did that
it's
factor in?
also relevant question. Thank you very much. So about the intensity of violence, we just use from the ACLED database all types of violence. So we don't differentiate here between the violence from the government or maybe from protesters. We don't differentiate between death, tear gas, or beatings. So everything that is non-peaceful protest is here under the category of violence. I mean, we could also separate it, or we could try to separate and then see if the effect is different. It's depending on the severity of the type of violence. I will also note this down, and maybe we can also include this.
A follow-up question from Ariane Manafi Niazi says, how do you distinguish between different kind? Oh, well, I guess that's what I also ask, and I'm glad that somebody in the audience also asked the same question. So he says, how do you distinguish between different kinds of protests in different cities? What kind of data do you use?
Yeah, maybe I can also say one more sentence about this. So you can, from the ACLED database, you can download the data based on the events, so on each case, and then we re-aggregated it on the city level so that we counted, okay, for example, in Tehran, I don't know, 100 violent events, 100 peaceful events, and then we calculated like this. And we did it for everything that we had the locational data, but I think it was almost completely with locational data, at least on the city or village level. But we don't know in which part of Tehran. This could be also maybe an issue because cities like Tehran are very big. But we knew, of course, or we knew from the data in which city it took place, and then we counted just the cases.
I see. And we have a question from Soran Mohtadi, and he says, I'm wondering to know, how did you distinguish between peaceful, and I guess we have already addressed this question, peaceful and violent protests in the context of women life freedom protests? I think you addressed it, but if you want to maybe reiterate your answer, please go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, like we used the ACLED data and we just counted the cases of, I mean, they have their own classification, so we use their classification and we considered then the number of peaceful, for example, in Tehran, the number of non-peaceful protests. And as I said, also we don't distinguish here about the severity of the violence. So it is simple distinguishing about these two facts. And we did it also for all the cities that we had available. Yeah.
So in essence, what if I can sum up what what my takeaway is, and perhaps you can correct me, is that definitely these protests affected people's satisfaction, life satisfaction, more for women than for men. But the conclusion that you draw is that protests in particular by themselves could actually be a way to increase life satisfaction if they're done in a peaceful way, that societies, governments could actually benefit from peaceful protest, because people essentially get things off their chest essentially, and they feel both that they have voiced their concerns as well as feel that they have been heard, but that it's the violence in the protest that affects life negatively. Is that the takeaway that you would like the audience, or at least the reader, to go away with? Is that what do I make the correct summation?
Yeah, I mean, you make a good summary about the main message here that we also want to present, that it is not the protest itself, but it's like the violence involved that is here the negative side. And as you said, also that previous studies have shown it that the peaceful protests can also have some benefit, as you also said, both for the protester but also for the government. So in the end, if there's some room for protest, it can be beneficial for everybody.
I see. I would like, just by way of maybe suggestion, if you have a way of maybe running a few more of these wonderful models to distinguish between age group. Again, the young versus the age, because I think that what we see in retrospect after these protests is this massive out-migration of young people and of very brilliant young people, which could be very detrimental in the long run for the country. And I think maybe that the results could be more, more telling of the impact of these protests. I think we may have one more question. Unfortunately, it seems that we will have to take a rain check on our second speaker, because he couldn't connect, and it's perhaps a good thing to say, please tune in for a sequel of this very important topic. But let me cover the last question that has come in by Pegahe Langerudi. He says, thanks for the presentation, but I was interested to know if there is a change in using the international media, since during the protests, probably the trust on internal channels decreased and people moved to use more informal and international channels. Can be also even in the effect of the protest, thus maybe an indigeneity could be detected in the model.
Yeah, thank you also for this question. I mean, we can also look into this. This is also a relevant question, that it might be that the protest affect the type of media consumption. I mean, this is also one thing we could look into and should also address, I guess, in the paper. Thank you.
Yeah. So the second paper that we plan to present today, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, we could not, there was connection problems, talks about or is about economic inequality, social capital, and subjective well-being among Iranians, evidence from the World Value Survey. So an equally very timely and very interesting topic, which we will have to address in our next in one of our next webinars. With that, I want to thank you very much for your very concise presentation, as well as the detailed answers that you've given to the many questions. I want to thank the International Iranian Economic Association for organizing this webinar, Kamiar Muhaddes and Mohammad Reza Farzanegan. And on behalf of the International Iranian Economic Association, I want to thank you again. And until our next webinar, which will be the second Wednesday in November. Thank you so much.
13th of November.
Kamiar-Jan, do you have some closing remarks?
No, I just want to say 13th of November is our next webinar. We look forward to seeing you all. And thank you, Nadereh, for the brilliant sharing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you also from my side. Thank you very much for organizing everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Sven. Thanks, Mohammed. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.